see if we can catch up. So welcome. If you are here for the Anatomy of an Enterprise Agile program session, you're in the right place, or you just wandered to the top of the stairs and went for the closest room, you're also in the right place for that. We'll get started. So I'm going to jump into this and tell you a little bit about myself. So I'm Ian Maple. I work for Intuit. I'm Intuit's Enterprise Agile leader. And I'll tell you maybe 3 things that you should know about me. It'll help you with this session. First one is I'm from down under. Specifically, that's why I talk funny. Specifically, I'm from New Zealand. That's the one with the Kiwis, not the kangaroos. New Zealand's down there, if you were wondering where it is, right on the edge there. This is a kiwi, national bird of New Zealand. This is not a kiwi. This is a kiwi fruit in New Zealand. Be careful what you order for breakfast. Okay, just a useful geography lesson there. All right, so I started my career as a developer, right? And somewhere along the way, something went horribly wrong, and I found myself in management, leading engineering teams and organizations around the world. And I like to say that I've led 4 agile lives. 4 agile lives. First one was as a developer. I know what it's like to go in and sit down with a customer, show them the software that I wrote yesterday, get their feedback, make those changes and go back to them the next day, rapid customer iterations there. So I know what it's like in the cockpit, so to speak. Later on, I led a global engineering organization, and I made a decision one day to take them to Agile from Waterfall. 7 development centers in 5 countries around the world, all at once. Ask me later how that went. A little bit later on, I went to work for an organization which I considered to be one of the more mature, more elite Agile organizations, and I really saw what it could be when adopted at enterprise level, and it's going really well. And this last one is where I am right now, Intuit, a large, diverse, interesting, eclectic mix of Agile teams and organizations. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about this thing called the Intuit Agile program. So if you don't know Intuit, you may have heard of some of our products. We are the makers of TurboTax, QuickBooks. You may have heard of Mint, our personal financial software. If you've heard of ProConnect, I'm sorry, that means you're an accountant, but that's what we do. Specifically within Intuit, I'm responsible for the Intuit Agile program. And if you just to put the context of Agile at Intuit, we've been doing Agile since around 2007. So we're in those awkward teenage years of Agile right now. And we have hundreds of teams globally distributed in about 27 locations around the world. We implement Agile in many different ways, and I'll show you some of this. So we have many playbooks. Fundamentally, though, we are rallying around the 12 Agile principles. And that's great, but we're actually using those principles to rally towards 6 outcomes, and we wrap it all up into one program called Intuit Agile. And we'll unpack a little bit of this as we go today. Okay, so we'd like to keep this somewhat interactive. So just a quick fist of 5. If you don't know how fist of 5 works, it's 1, 2, 3, show us, and you're going to hold up a number of fingers. And the question on the table is, how well does your organization support Agile? And if you haven't started yet, think about how well it supports those kinds of programs, but Agile specifically. All right, so if you, absolutely, we've got it now, we support it really well, you're a 5. Or a 4. If you feel like it's not supported at all very well, you're a 1 or a 0. And if it's a 1, depending on how you feel about that support, you can choose your finger to whatever you want. All right, now you're not just showing me, you're showing each other. So I'd like you to do that now. Just show each other, right? Well, so 1, 2, 3, show us. Just hold them up. Just look around. See at your table. See how it's going. Yep. Okay. All right, good, useful. All right, now, an interesting thing about this question is that last word, Agile. What does that even mean? Right, what is Agile? So let's play a little Agile bingo. Who's heard, if I asked you what Agile meant, or you've asked somebody else and got an answer, what are some of those things? Just yell them out. Iterative. Scrum. Agile is Scrum. It's what? Self-organizing. Collaborative. It's a process. I'm sorry. Customer. Yeah, customer-centric. Yeah, and the problem with this is that when you ask people what is Agile, some are going to say, oh yeah, Agile is Scrum. Some are going to say, oh, it's a complete mindset. Some are going to say, oh yeah, my team, they do daily stand-ups. We're Agile, right? And there's no one answer to that. And so my job is Intuit Agile. So what does that even mean? So what if we, I get these questions from leaders all the time. Come make me Agile. Sometimes they don't say please. So just like, get over here and make us Agile. And I think that's a real challenge. So I had this boss, sorry, he's a bit blurry at scale. This is one of my former bosses at Intuit. And he said this thing to me one day, and I was like, yeah, that's kind of true. He said, an argument can be made that Agile covers everything, right? All across the company in all different aspects. And I was like, wow, yeah, that's mind-blowing, and that's unfortunate for me because I own Agile at Intuit. So I thought, well, how do we even think about that? And I thought, well, why don't we flip that on its head a little bit and talk about what Agile is not, all right? So I got this other quote, and it says, Agile is not just a 2-week process for a team, all right? Said every Agile coach ever. And I thought, well, let me help you understand how we embrace Agile through this quote. Now, at the end of this is this thing called the Intuit Agile program that we're going to talk about today. But if it covers everything, we need to kind of filter that and structure that and kind of get our heads around it. And we do that through 4 primary filters that we start to think about in terms of Agile. So the first one is around this idea that Agile is not a process, or not just a process. And so let's talk a little bit about outcome. Now, this is the vision statement of the Intuit Agile program. Deliver world-class agility through enterprise-wide adoption of the Agile principles. So what it says here is we embrace Agile, not just Scrum, but the Agile and the Agile principles. But more importantly, it says the goal here is not to do Agile. It's weird, right? Like my job is the Agile program, but the goal of the Agile program is not to make you Agile, but to deliver agility. And what we mean by that is that we're going to take those 12 Agile principles, right? And these are not ones we invented. These are the ones that are available on the manifesto and principles. We back those up with a ton of different Agile practices. And those practices come from different flavors of Agile. User stories and storyboards and cycle time charts and burn-up charts and burn-down charts, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But more importantly, we're going to take those practices and we are going to align those to one of the 6 outcomes that we care about. All right, so we know which practices are going to help with speed, which ones are going to help with productivity, and we're going to map that. Now, those agility outcomes are essentially the business outcomes. The business wants those things, right? And so this is where we track from Agile up into the business outcomes and into the goals of the organization, right? So the organization is trying to do something, and those are into its true north goals, and Agile is the engine of that, right? And we can map all that stuff up. So outcome is the first filter. What outcome are we interested in? The second one is Agile is not just about a team, all right? It is about a team, but it's more than that. So the second filter we apply is level. And level looks like this. And you've probably heard some of these terms before. At the first level is Team Agile. This is our single 2-pizza Scrum team. This is where the original Agile frameworks came from, like Scrum and Kanban. Those guys are focused and tend to be at the team level. Right? Later on, we started talking about, well, that's great for a one-team startup, but what about a large enterprise? Well, we've got to do scaled Agile, right? And this is where we're trying to deliver many large initiatives across multiple teams in a complex environment, and now we're starting to engage Agile at the leadership team level. And by the way, this is also where the scaled Agile frameworks live, like SAFe and those guys. The new third level that's emerging now is what I call enterprise Agile, but you may hear it referred to as business agility. And this is where we're doing Agile all over the organization. The entire organization have a mindset of Agile. Agile financials, Agile HR policies, and really at the most senior levels of the organization now. Right? The C-suite gets it, if you like. All right? So this is our second filter. What are we talking about when we engage with the organization at the level? The third one is Agile is not just. Right? Now, what I mean by that is that for different teams in different parts of the organization, what they need from Agile can be very different. And the third filter we look at is in terms of maturity. All right? So when we think of the Agile maturity spectrum, goes from 0 to 100, right? We put that into some buckets. Over here, you're not Agile. Never heard of it, don't do it, haven't started it, we still do waterfall, etc. And then we're going to start doing Agile, right? And when you're in doing Agile, that's typically where you're applying one of those frameworks. You've got the Scrum book and you're going through it chapter by chapter, and on page 27 it says do this, so we do that, right? They're very prescriptive. Now eventually, you'll start to get good at that through training, coaching, and support, etc. And you start being Agile. Being Agile is where you're starting to realize why you were doing that in the first place. You're starting to mix and match those practices and testing out different things, all right? And the last stage that we like to describe when you're approaching that super elite level is beyond Agile. Right? Now, if I go and talk to a beyond Agile team, they'll rail on all day long about how they talk to the customer every 5 minutes and deploy code 100 times a day, and but they never use the words. They didn't say Agile, they didn't say Scrum, Scrum Master, Story, whatever, but they're just in a super in-the-zone state. Right? Now, we want to deliver world-class agility. We modeled this mathematically, and no, I didn't. I just drew that curve. Somewhere over to the right is world-class agility, right? It's definitely not agile, not agile, and not doing agile, but it's over there in that being agile and beyond agile state, right? So that's where we aspire to be from a maturity perspective, and what we would do for a beyond agile team differs greatly from a not agile team. Okay, the fourth filter is agile's not just about 2 weeks. All right, and this filter is altitude. So when we talk about altitude, we talk about 5 altitudes of Agile. And each altitude has a time horizon, it has a sort of scope element, and it has a prioritized, estimated sized backlog of something. Down at the lowest level is the 24-hour time horizon. This is where we're doing our daily stand-ups. This is where we're talking about user tasks that we're trying to check off against the story, and so on and so forth. Come up one altitude, and this is where Agile or Scrum, those sort of frameworks tend to live, right in the 2-week time horizon. Now we're talking about user stories and doing the usual sort of Scrum-type rhythms that you'd expect to see in an Agile team context. But it doesn't stop there. We go up again, and now we tend to be in that quarterly context. Now we don't have a backlog of user stories, we have a backlog of epics in our context, right? And we keep on going up. We go up to the 12-month, we have a backlog of ideas and initiatives, and we keep going up, and we have the 3 to 5 years, a backlog of goals that we're trying to deliver, all strategic priorities. Now, you also notice in here that Agile for Intuit is not just Agile. Right? So on some of these words you'll recognize, like tasks and stories and epics, etc., and some of them you might not, like experiments and leap of faith assumptions. And this is because we integrate our design thinking methodology called Design for Delight and Agile together, and we execute them at these 5 altitudes. All right? We're not going to go too much into that today, but just be aware that that's not just the standard Agile stuff. Okay, so that leads us to the last word, which is Agile. And this thing that I'm responsible for called the Intuit Agile program. And for us, that is a combination of different components that we're going to unpack today. Right? So this is the, how we sort of think about the charter and leadership of the program. The blue boxes are like the products and services that we offer. And then we sort of back those up with these orange boxes. And that's exactly how we kind of think about bringing the program to bear. What are we going to bring to bear? Which component for those filters? So, yikes. Imagine now that I've got all these teams coming at me. They want different outcomes. They're operating at different levels. Some are leadership teams, some are executive teams, some are agile teams, Scrum teams. They're all at different levels of maturity in the organization. They're worried about different things in terms of the altitude. And then we've got these 10 different components that we could bring to bear on any of those tracks through that. So imagine how many possible options there are to go through those different filters and arrive at different parts of the program. It's a lot, right? Now, if you're thinking, wow, you must have got all this nailed and we've got all those possible tracks done, think again. We do not, right? But I will say this. We don't build Intuit Agile with waterfall, right? So there are lots of pieces missing. Like I don't have a structured offering for the not Agile senior executives who are trying to think about what they do every day sort of thing. But I get those phone calls. And based on that demand, we are going to focus on delivering something for them. Now in the beginning, that is typically what we call an unstructured offering. We're going to show up, we're going to talk to them, we're going to figure out what they need, and we might just solve it by just talking to them, right? But as we iterate and experiment with those things and we see that demand repeating and coming back again and again, we might transform that into a structured offering, right? Which means that it's got templates and documents and all that kind of good stuff, and then we can start to scale that. We can start to deploy that and use other people to deploy that offering. Okay, so before we can do any of that, we need to start with a solid foundation. And this is the first box, the charter and leadership. Now, I'm not going to go through all of the things that are under offer under all these boxes. I'm just going to give you a little taste here. But under charter and leadership, we start with executive sponsorship and alignment, right? Alignment means that if this Agile program doesn't align with the goals of the organization, it's going to be an uphill battle, right? And it does. It absolutely does in Intuit, and we get executive sponsorship, so now we sort of set the ship in motion. The next thing we do is we build the Agile leadership team. I'll talk to you about that in a second. And we need to put together a fundamental charter about what this team is all about. So let me tell you a little bit about these two things. So the Agile leadership team looks like this. Here's the Intuit Agile program. You have an enterprise Agile leader. You're looking at him. It's right here. All right? So I, as enterprise Agile leader, reach out into the business. And I talk to each of the organizations and I say, hey, who's your Agile leader? Who represents you as we scale this thing across a multi-business unit kind of model? And they say, okay, it's this person. And together, this group of people is what we call the Agile leadership team. Now, the Agile leadership team does some things I'll show you in a second. But these individual Agile leaders then form their own Agile teams, programs, et cetera, that are sort of a distribution of the Intuit Agile program overall. And that's how we scale across the organization. All right, so it's not a central team that goes off and handles all the coaching or anything like that. We use and leverage teams within these orgs. So if we look across those program components, for each of those components, there's some responsibilities that the Agile leadership team takes on, this group of people, and there's some responsibilities that the org programs themselves take on. And I won't go into all the details, but suffice it to say, on the left-hand side, this team is responsible for defining Agile. What is the Intuit Agile program? They understand the needs of the organization. They're talking to senior leaders, and they're developing and sort of maintaining the standards that we're going to try and deploy across the organization. On the right-hand side, we provide Agile, right? So those teams within the organizations, they're the ones that are handling the adoption of the program. They are maintaining a team of champions, evangelists, coaches, whatever you want to call them, that's the team within this box, right? Our coaches live there. We don't maintain a central pool of coaches. We maintain internal trainers. Those internal trainers exist in that box as well, all right? They run the classes, some of the classes. Some of them we use vendors. They run the workshops, and I'll show you what the difference is a little later. But the most important thing that they do is that they define Agile, right? The ideas of how to do an amazing daily stand-up don't come from the ivory tower, certainly don't come from me. They come from a team that's figured out a great way to do it. And that comes back through the Agile leadership team, and then we may or may not scale that through the organization. All right, so this is the model of the Agile leadership team. The Agile charter, one of the most important things that we can do is chartering. And I know that Matt from Google, I think he's talking about this next, so session 2 if you're interested in this. But Google did this study about what makes a team effective, and it was all about how the team worked together, right? And there were some key factors there. I'm not going to go into this because I don't want to steal from what Matt's talking about. But suffice it to say, you really want to establish a team in the roadway in a healthy way. And we also lean into this thing called the Drexler-Sibbett model. You've probably heard of the forming, storming, norming, performing model. This is a variation of that. But what it fundamentally says that if you want to get your high-performing team over there, you have to answer these questions. Why am I here? Who are we? What are we doing here? How are we going to do it? And who's going to do what? Right? So this is all part of our team chartering establishment. And we did this team chartering with the Intuit Agile program itself. Right? That Agile leadership team has its own team charter. So what you do in team chartering is that you get to know each other. Right? Psychological safety is important. Build trust, and this is a group of strangers. We get to that alignment that I talked about. Right? So this picture you see here is Intuit's alignment triangle. It starts with the company's statement, powering prosperity around the world, and eventually you can't read it, but it'll get down to specific priorities of the organization and strategy, and et cetera, and you can circle on there. Intuit Agile fits here. If I can't circle that as a team, then I might have a question about where we actually fit or if we fit. We start with our customers. Right? We're very customer-centric, design thinking. So who are the customers of Intuit Agile? Right? Not the TurboTax user, not the QuickBooks user, but our internal teams, our internal leaders. Those are our customers. What is our ideal state? World-class agility, what does that mean? How would we measure it? What are the success metrics? And what's the mission statement? What do we do around here to move towards that ideal state? Responsibility clarity. Who's going to do what on this team? Right? We're going to be very crisp about this, and so I'll show you a little bit about this later. And what's our operating model? Like how are we going to function? Now, if we've done all this, then we're starting to get a team in the roadway. Now, this is one of our structured offerings, so it'll be accompanied with templates and documents, and teams can fill it in, and they can self-do this, or they can be managed through it by any number of resources in that Agile Champions team. And eventually, they should be able to spit out something pretty simple. Like this is just an example one, but it's a team charter poster. It doesn't have all the details in it, but you can pretty much glance at that and say, okay, this is where we align. These are our customers. There's our ideal state. Here's what we do, and so on and so forth. Not only that, who's on the team, and what's the escalation path for impediments, et cetera. Okay? So when you do this, you're starting to get all the teams ready to rock. Right? And that's really important, and for the Intuit Agile program as well. Okay, so I'd like you to come out of today with something that you can use, or start to leverage. So I think you've all got a worksheet now. On that worksheet, on one side of it is some empty boxes, and I'd like you to do a couple of things in this first thing. First of all, I'd like you to introduce yourselves to your table mates. Right? Get to know each other. Then I'd like to say, well, what do you already have here? Maybe it's some of this, maybe you don't have some of this, and you're going to fill that in that first box that says charter and leadership. Don't worry about the rest of it yet. And what else, maybe from this list or from a conversation you're about to have with your table mates, you might want to explore. And then I'd like you to just quickly share that with your table, and I'm going to give you 2 minutes to do that. All right? So, oops, let's try that again. So do that, and then we'll come back to this, and I'll see if this is actually, I think it's working. Let me know if you have any questions on that. Don't forget that conversation part, because what you learn from each other might be much more valuable than you learn from me. Okay, so I hope you've made some useful context, if nothing else, from that conversation. Does anybody want to share something that they feel was like resonated with them from this, or that they heard from somebody at their table that's like even better than that? Because I'm also interested to that. Anybody? Or you could just introduce your table mates. It's up to you. Yeah.
So I'll just share. I like your the picture that you had where you had the plethora of all the keys at the bottom.
Yeah. Yeah.
I found with all my work with Agile, it's like, oh, you got to do it this way. No, you got to do it this way. No, you
Yeah.
got to do it this way.
Yeah.
But it just one formula does not fit for hardware development or
Yeah.
software development, cybersecurity, or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
So just empowering the team, having them work together. What works for you?
Yeah.
Report it up to get the common.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that mix and match of the practices is exactly how we describe it at the end of our training. It's like, hey, here's Introduction to Agile. By the way, don't think of this as 100 things I have to do. Think of this as a buffet of options that help with different outcomes. Now go play with them, right? And that's the way to think about it. Yeah, great call out. Any others? Anybody else want to share that they heard? Yes. Right.
And then run back to the developers for them to have another 6 months.
Yeah.
So the code makes said that it really looks like it's a product, but you really can use Agile at a lot of different ways.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we often get this that's sort of into that enterprise Agile tier. We talked about this idea that Agile can be applied in all sorts of different ways. I've trained HR teams and customer care teams and finance teams that don't write a single line of code, but they're getting huge benefits from some of those Agile practices. Yeah, great call out. All right, let's keep going there. And by the way, if you had a really great conversation at your table that was much more interesting than me talking, just keep having that conversation. You'll get a lot more out of the rest of the session. All right. Okay, so let's go back to this. Hey, can you maybe please come and make us Agile? All right. So here's a customer problem statement that I might get at some point. Right? I'm the Scrum Master for my team. I'm trying to make my team Agile, and they think Agile's too much overhead. They don't want to do it because they don't even understand the basics, which makes me feel frustrated and useless. Now, this customer problem statement comes from our Design for Delight approach around the design thinking stuff. We're not going to talk about that today, but suffice it to say, we always start here when we talk about our customers. Now, what do you think about this customer problem statement, specifically the I am trying to? I'm trying to make my team Agile. That's not what I want. I don't want to make your team Agile. That's not the point. So what if we rewrote this customer problem statement? It says something like, I am the Scrum Master for a finance team. Why is that important that it's a finance team? For me. I'm gonna pick up the phone and call somebody else, right? Who's my finance Agile leader? I need them in the room for this, or I might just hand this to them. I'm trying to improve the productivity of our team, but our daily stand-up takes 45 minutes every day. Anybody? Anybody? And our sprint planning lasts 4 hours every sprint because our planning is chaotic due to unclear prioritization and poor quality stories, which makes me feel frustrated and useless, right? Now, if we took this customer problem statement that we've massaged a bit, and we then tried to look at our filters there, what outcome are we focused on here? Productivity, right? It says so right there. What's the level? Team, right? I got a single Scrum team there, so I'm talking about team. What's the maturity of this team? Agile maturity of this team? Yeah, you might make the argument with a 40-minute stand they're not Agile, but they're doing Agile, right? Because they're having a stand-up and doing some of that stuff, but they haven't kind of got it yet, right? So they're probably a doing Agile team. And what altitude are we talking about here? Sprint, yep, we're talking about sprint and probably the daily stuff too, right? So there's somewhere in there. And this isn't a one path through this, right? You can have multiple paths. So that's kind of now starting to think about what are we going to bring to bear on those teams, or on this team, sorry. So let's say that for this one, let's do some assess. Let's do some learn. Let's do some coach and some support, and we'll bring some content to bear. All right, and so let's unpack that a little bit. So for assess, right, maybe we need to unpack and find out what's wrong with this team. So we're going to have a chat, right? That initial chat, unstructured obviously, and that took us to that maybe revised customer problem statement. It might have taken us to a different set of people that we need to engage with, right? We're not going to talk much more about that. We also have other assessments, but I'll leap all the way to the most comprehensive one, our comprehensive Agile assessment. And that is one of our structured offerings, so it's got documents and templates, and they can self-guide or be coached through it. But essentially, it's going to look at the quantitative stuff, their dashboards, their reports, their JIRA stories, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We're going to talk to the team members, particularly those that play the key roles. We're going to do a qualitative maturity assessment. That's a separate tool that we use and ask the team about how they're doing against the Agile practices or how they think they're doing. We do responsibility mapping, and I'll show you what that is a little later, but we want to understand who does what on this team because it's not always clear. And then from there, we're going to take that into an action plan. And we're going to actually then bring to bear other products of the Agile program, maybe training, maybe coaching, et cetera. All right? So let's assume that this team needs some skills. All right? So that leads us to the learn component. And the learn component is made up of two things. One is our certified training model, and one is what we call WARP for skills development. So let's start with the certified training. So we use IC Agile. Those are the guys downstairs. I think Ahmed is hanging out in this room. He's hiding. He's over there. You can chat with him, and he's going to be speaking to you all later at lunchtime. But why do we use IC Agile? IC Agile is not a training vendor. They are certifying courses, right? And that means that we can take any vendor in the world, have them make sure that their course is certified by IC Agile, and we can take a different vendor in a different part of the world and get that thing certified. Not going to be exactly the same, but they hit all the same learning objectives, and we're comfortable with that. Also, we can offer our employees certification. Now, at the Agile Fundamentals track down here is where we start. We do this. All right, so we feel important enough that we have to bring that in-house, and we do that. We have a course called Agile Foundations and a variant for leaders, and we had that certified by IC Agile. That gives us a lot of control, but also gives us certification, also gives us a path into these other tracks. All right, so this is a framework that allows us to scale consistently across the world, as well as offer our internal stuff. This is our Agile Foundations class. It's pretty fun, highly interactive, highly rated, lots of Lego and tennis balls and activities, etc. It's really got two goals in mind. One is to answer the question of what is Agile, right? The other is more importantly to answer the question is what is Agile here? What is Agile at Intuit? And so we're basically able to talk about Agile at Intuit, but even more granular than that, because the trainer is coming from my business unit, they can talk about Agile here, right? How we apply the Intuit Agile program within our business unit. So we have those internal trainers. Our goal is to train 100% of our employees. I think we're about 45% of the way there right now. But on board to the company, we want you in this class within 30 days. And it evolves over time. The organization does not stand still. It is evolving. We evolve this, and obviously keeping it certified. Don't worry, Ahmed, we're good. And that's an important thing, because if you create this thing and you just post it out there and it stays stale for the next 5 years, people will stop using it, right? So it has to evolve. Okay, what's WARP? So WARP is classroom training is not for everybody. And so WARP is different learning styles, and we want to offer a variety of that stuff. So the first one is watch. Maybe it's not a classroom training, maybe it's a micro-learning video. Maybe it's an online e-course or something like that. You could learn the skill. You could attend one of those certified classes from, that we work with IC Agile on, a workshop that we have or something like that. You can also read something, right? Here's a link to a blog or a book or a white paper that we like, or you could participate. Go share, go visit from another team, learn something, get some coaching, etc. So this is the idea that we want to kind of solve learning from a number of different angles. Okay, so we supplement learning, obviously, with coaching. We also have structured and unstructured offerings around coaching. So we obviously start with the typical Agile coaching. Here's our Agile coaches. They're apparently a bunch of very angry people. That was the graphic I got. But we also offer structured workshops. Now, the difference between a workshop and a training class is the workshop is their stuff, right? We're not teaching them the theory. We're actually doing something with them. Here are some of the workshops that we offer. And this is not all of them, by the way, but that team chartering I mentioned to you before, we can run that as a workshop. We do responsibility mapping. I'll show you this one in a second. Story writing retros. There's a whole bunch of them. The idea here is that they're repeatable, they're scalable. We got materials and all that kind of good stuff around them, and we can train people to execute those. Okay, so that leads us to responsibility mapping specifically. What am I in Agile responsibility mapping? This is where we try and solve for different organizational structures that are all trying to do Agile. So we need a product owner, we need a scrum master, we need a team, but what I don't have that. I have a product manager, not a product owner. I have a dev manager, not a team, or I have a program manager, not a scrum master. So how do we map that stuff? And I won't tell you the whole thing, but suffice it to say that we start with those roles that we're looking for in Agile. We identify a set of responsibilities for each one. We take those responsibilities, and what's important is that the team knows who owns the responsibilities. Not who's the product owner, but who owns the responsibilities. And this is the end result of it. I apologize, I leapt to the end. The link is on the back of your worksheets, so you can get the full instructions to it. But essentially, you'll see those cards kind of end up in different people's columns. We know who's got it. We know what comfort level they have of it. And then we can start to take action on it. All right, so this is responsibility mapping, and it's a key part of establishing a team for us. Okay, so this is the end result of this exercise, is that we might start with a card. This one is a team card, and it was supposed to be the team. There's the responsibility. On the back of the card is some more details about the responsibility. Then there's the skills that we associate with those responsibilities, and then they might look up one of those, in this case, Agile Flight Crews, and they come to our content, and they'll find that warp section, right? And then they can learn however they want to learn about that skill, if that's what they want to do, okay? All right, so I'd like you now just to take 1 minute and take a crack at some of that stuff in any of those boxes. So on your worksheet, what do you already have? What might be useful to explore? If you've got something else that you can offer to your table mates that's not the stuff that you think really works in your company, share that with them as well. And let's do this. I think this is just 1 minute instead of 2 minutes. We'll save some time. All right? No pressure. You've only got 1 minute. Okay, so I'm gonna draw you back in now. Sounds like those conversations are much more useful at your table. Anything resonate here? Or did you hear anything from your table mates that's like, that's even more awesome than what Ian said? Again, I'm listening, right? Anything resonate? If there's nothing, I'm gonna just review this whole deck and just start again. Anything from here that you felt would be useful for you? Or that you've heard from your table mates that will be more useful? Yeah. Yeah, check it out. The full instructions on how to do it are on the back of the sheet. And if you can't find it, just let me know, but they're all there. Yeah. 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 Yeah, cool. Yeah, excellent. All right. Okay, so outcome-focused, data-driven. This is the support part, right? Now, there's various components to our support, but a lot of it is around our tools and dashboards and our Agile metrics. All right, so I'm not going to go too much into the tools and dashboard. We have an internal Agile tool. That's kind of what you're looking at here. But let's talk a little bit about metrics and being data-driven. So remember we had this picture, right? So what are we trying to do as an organization? What do we want to focus on from an outcome perspective? Maybe it's productivity, or maybe it's predictability in this case. Well, we know kind of which Agile principles support predictability. I'm not sure those are the ones, but you know what I mean. And then we can map the Agile practices that support that predictability outcome. And then in order to support those, we have to have some basic environmental and hygiene things in place, right? We want to look at trailing outcome metrics, because what we care about is the outcome. So what are we going to measure there? Then we can look at the leading practice metrics to understand that. And then we can look at some basic hygiene metrics to understand that. All right? So to give you an example of all this, and sorry it gets a bit complicated, let's say that their outcome is speed. Right? And let's say, I'm not sure this is the best one, but let's say one of our outcome metrics around speed is story cycle time. How long did it take us to get the story across the board? Right? The supporting Agile practices for speed, so we like Agile flight crews, we want obviously smaller stories, we want those teams to do story huddles, and if you don't know what those things are, don't worry, I'm not going to explain them to you, ask me later. But then we can identify the metrics associated with those practices, and let's say stories with smaller sizes, we kind of want to assess that. In order to do that, we have to know how many of our stories have estimates. All right? So we can build up these sort of metrics hierarchies for the purpose. We're very cautious about metrics. I'm very hesitant about the weaponization of metrics by leadership and all that kind of stuff. So our metrics conversation is always about, this is the team's metrics. You're going to share with your leadership what you're going to share, but it's not about, here's 3,000 metrics, and now we're going to throw that at the team and go, better do it, or else, this doesn't work like that, okay? All right, so this is kind of how we think about the metrics picture. From a content perspective, let's say that we're going to, that's where the warp sections live, by the way. We are going to start with agile.intuit.com. Sorry, you can't get to that, and if you can, we've got a security problem, but in which case, feel free. But a couple of things I want to highlight here. One is, yes, we have content, but the second thing is, if you've noticed, we have a brand. Right? We have Intuit Agile. It's a program, it's a brand, and it's much easier for me to tell somebody to go to agile.intuit.com than to go to internalwiki.intuit.com /subpage/agile. Right? So we're rallying around that stuff. You see our branding, and it makes it much easier to rally around. You even see it on my laptop here. It doesn't reflect, but the Agile logo is there as well. Okay? The second thing is that we are a diverse organization, and we implement Agile in many different ways, and we use this playbook model. I'll explain it briefly, but here's some of the things you might see on the homepage of intuitagile.com. Right? Just look up topics, ask a question, get the training, use the tool, assess your maturity, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All right? It's not all the things that are there, but just some of the things. And this is essentially different ways to navigate and access the program through that single agile.intuit.com brand. Okay? Because easy access is key here. If you can't access it, then they're never going to use it. Okay, one size does not fit all, consistent but flexible, right? We are not a do-it-this-way only Scrum kind of company. Agile is made up of a bunch of different flavors, and we are in the awkward teenage years of agility, right? With lots of different maturity. If I went into a Beyond Agile team and I said, here's a Scrum book, start on page 1 and go to chapter 27, they're going to throw me out, right? Some of them tried to. But we still need to cater for all those things. So what we do is, we'll eventually get down to maybe one of the practices. So this is what you might see on one of our content pages. Up here, it'll say daily stand-up or something like that. What do we require Intuit-wide? Ideally, nothing. We don't really want to be overly prescriptive at the Intuit-wide level. But we prefer you did daily stand-ups story-driven rather than person-driven. We're okay if you did person-driven. But we want you to stop using the daily stand-up as a status reporting meeting. All right? Org 3 might come along and go, no, we need person-driven for whatever reason. They probably don't, right? And so they can require it like that. So if I'm a developer in any part of Intuit, I arrive at this page and I can see the playbook and I can see how my part of the organization needs to apply or is asking me to apply. But again, we don't want to see a lot of prescription here. Mostly it's just watch out for these things. We don't need you to do anything in particular. Okay, so same thing here. What do you think about metrics? What do you think about the brand? What do you think about playbooks? What else do you have at your table? So I'll give you 1 minute for that. All right? Actually, I'm going to give you 30 seconds for that because I've only got 10 minutes left. All right, sorry to rush you along. Anything resonate there? Anything that really sprang out to you that you think, wow, yeah, we should do that? Do you want me to repeat that section again? We'll have time.
We have a shared struggle of leadership wanting certain metrics, but having them weaponized against teams.
Yeah.
And then teams want their own kind of metrics that
Yeah.
do not look good to leadership. It's a
Yeah.
balance.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, usually, well, what I found is leaders tend to start going into this level of detail because they don't get the answers that they're looking for. And it's usually because they're trying to make their teams agile and they're not focused on the outcomes. So leaders tend to be, certainly as you go up the organization, will look for those outcome metrics. And if they start to see the right trends and everything, and you've got a way to tell a story below that, you can usually draw them away from getting bogged down in the details. But yeah, depends on the leader, depends on the team. All right, thank you for that. Let's keep going. So let's do this last customer problem. Sorry, there's only two. I made it sound like there's a series of them. I'm a director of a group comprised of 8 Scrum teams. I'm trying to deliver on our quarterly commitments. We're struggling to coordinate between those teams and to control the rate of defect escapes. We're short-staffed, morale is low, and I'm not supporting my teams, right? So here's a different customer problem or a different phone call that I got that I've interpreted as a customer problem statement. So for this one, what's the outcome here? There's no wrong answer. There is a wrong answer. I went. Yeah, they got a quality problem. They got a predictability problem. This is not clear, right? Like this person has multiple outcomes that they're looking to improve. And at some point, we're going to have to talk about that. Like, where do we start, right? Which of those are we going to rank number one? The level is scaled, right? We're in multiple Scrum team world here, but the teams are individually still in play here. We're going to have to do something with those teams, but we're also going to have to do something with that leadership team potentially. The maturity here is not clear, right? He or she says Scrum teams, but they often use that term generically just to mean a team. So this is unknown, and this might lead us to that part of that assessment where we've got to do that maturity assessment, or certainly the qualitative maturity assessment part of it, to know whether they even are in this or not. Altitude-wise, now we're up in the quarterly projection we're trying to resolve, right? Not so much worried about the daily stuff, but sprints and stories are probably in there somewhere, but I would guess it's more in the quarter and maybe the epic level. Okay, so for this team, let's, we'll probably do those other things as well, so it's not just this stuff, but let's say this team needs help with some recruiting, they need help with some partners, and maybe we're going to hook them up because they are feeling isolated. So let's get some new talent in here. So one of the things that we try and support the organization in is on consistent job descriptions. So when they put, we're looking for a Scrum Master, we're looking for an engineer who has experience with Agile, we're going to give them some language around that. They don't always use it, so don't Don't call me if you see an Intuit job description and it's terrible. But we can provide them some consistency there if they do it. The other thing is obviously we can do the screening and interviewing. And Intuit has an internal process called Assess for Awesome, and it's very heavily sort of scenario based. So come in and show us how you would tackle this scenario kind of thing, and we can certainly help describe what those scenarios would be and the language we'd be looking for in there. All right, so we can assist in the recruiting. Second thing is the partners. So when we work with either a training vendor or a coaching vendor or something like that, we are going to help select them. So we can say this one's good, this one's bad, or we like it for this and not for that, et cetera, et cetera. But we also, and importantly, onboard those vendors. What we don't want is somebody coming in and saying, okay, I've got a Scrum class and I'm going to teach Scrum like this, and da-da-da. Maybe you will, but before we do that, we're going to actually onboard you to the Intuit Agile program so you know what we're about, what we're not about, so you're going to get that perspective before you step in front of our folks. Okay, so we could hook them up with communities. We run Agile Lean coffees, send out newsletters, do monthly events with speakers, run online communities, all this kind of stuff. And there's no one way that it happens or one is better than the other, but building the buzz and connecting people is really, really powerful. Right? You can't just have 5 Agile coaches or 10 Agile coaches and expect that you're going to solve the world's problems, but what you do have is a lot of employees. And over time, those employees are going to be beyond Agile. They can help other employees, and that's the mechanism we use for that. All right, so I'm gonna skip this one. Feel free to fill that out yourself, because I want to save a little bit of time here. Let's leap ahead to, last but not least, external Agile. Well, guess what? This is external Agile for us. Not just me, no, it's not just a picture of me that I go and socialize. But why do we step out here? Why am I standing here in front of you? Is because Intuit has a basic philosophy about giving back to the community. And that includes our Agile community. I'm the Agile guy, I'm giving back to the Agile community. So we definitely want to be helping share and raise awareness and learn all that stuff. But selfishly, I'm much interested in learning from you, right? Like that's why I was asking those questions. I really am listening. But we want to learn best practice, and we want to continue that loop and make the connections. All right. So this external Agile is all about that loop, outward and inward. All right. So here's the bottom line. If you are interested in figuring out your Agile program at your organization, all right, my suggestion is as follows. Start with a clear vision and charter. That's stuff that we started talking about. Know who your customers are, executive sponsorship, alignment, ideal state, success metrics, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Start there. Have a framework that you can build on. Now, the boxes on that sheet, that's the framework we use. You could cross those boxes out, use different boxes, I don't really care. But why I want you to start to filling out that sheet is, that's a start of a framework for you, and you can start to build a program if you so desired. All right, so start with a framework you can build on. Don't worry about having all the pieces and all the boxes checked. Right? Respond to the demand, build it as you go, fill in the pieces, but because you have a framework, it's much easier for you to respond and know where and know who to talk to, okay? I suggest you be data-driven, both in the adoption of the Agile program as well as the other metrics that we talked about, the team performance metrics. And that's much easier to have conversations, particularly with leadership, who want to know what's going on and how it's going on. And I think this is one of the biggest challenges of Agile is like, prove to me that a Scrum Master is worth it. Prove to me that, and the more data that you can bring to bear and start to tell these stories, that's going to make your jobs easier as well. All right, and don't forget, it's not about the Agile. Intuit Agile is not about the Agile. It's about delivering those agility outcomes. And that resonates, just like we talked about with that triangle slide, resonates greatly with the person who mentioned it, but also with our leadership too, because they're like, oh yeah, I care about outcomes. I may not care about daily stand-ups, but I care about the outcomes. Okay, thank you. You can ask me anything. I think we have 2 minutes for questions, or you can link to me and ask me later. But yes, question.